There's value in making mistakes. We talked about this earlier. You want to kind of try things. And there's a difference between trying new things and taking risks. The truth is, most millennials, the type of people that companies really want to hire, crave and need feedback. But you can be honest and it can be kind. It doesn't mean it always has to be what they want to hear, but you can deliver it in a kind way, right? And giving developmental, constructive feedback is actually much kinder than not telling people what they're doing wrong. And I think creating a culture where people feel safe giving uncomfortable feedback and know that they're not going to be punished for it, and also know that they're not going to be punished for making mistakes all the time. Obviously, you make the same mistake over and over again, like that's an issue. But I would challenge the idea that you can't be kind and give honest, constructive feedback and always try to get better.
In today's episode of Everyday Leadership, I have the pleasure of talking to Matt Hoffman, who is a partner and the head of talent at M13, who are, for me personally anyway, one of the good VC firms out there that actually I'm tapping into. They've invested in hundreds of companies like Ring, Q, Slack, Snapchat, just to name a few. But they're actually very, very different in the way that they approach startups. So it's not just about, we're going to give you money and that's it. But they actually lean into a number of experts like Matt and kind of help you to create teams that help you make better decisions. So it's like your money's working smarter, not just harder. And I think that's kind of what I really liked about M13. And Matt has been a VP of people, DigitalOcean, Return Path, companies that are number 1 and number 2 in the US when it comes to great places to work. So we're going to delve into a number of questions around what it takes to create a great team. But prior to that, he's worked in corporate, JP Chase, Avon, and high growth startups are his thing, as well as holding advisory and board roles. So Matt, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. That's the best intro I ever got. That's the best description of the company I've seen, and I appreciate it. I will also just add to kind of humble brag for a super quick sec, because it's mostly about me. We also, even at M13, were recently named the best place to work in Adelaide and New York. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about why creating great places to work actually lead to great outcomes and great performance. But thank you so much. That's a wonderful introduction.
Wow, I'm curious now. I want to start from a completely different place. Everywhere you've gone, the last 3 companies you worked with, you won a lot of awards about great place to work. And as someone who works in talent or looks after people, obviously you've had a massive part to play in that. So has this all been driven by you interceding? What's been that key? Because you're the common denominator between all 3 organizations.
People leader will tell you is you can be the most amazing HR leader with the best ideas, and if you don't get your senior leadership to buy into them, it doesn't matter. So it all starts at the top. So I've been really, really lucky that I've worked with some amazing CEOs and some amazing founders. I've worked twice with both the COO at DigitalOcean and now managing partner here at M13, and he's played an extraordinary role in creating this great culture and creates a situation. But it's always the CEO and the founders, and I'm so blessed to work with 2 amazing founding partners, Carter and Courtney Ream, at M13, which really kind of lay the foundation for everything. So what people like me do is we create the container for great cultures. We figure out how to make sure we're giving good feedback, to be honest, to be kind, to focus on people's development, to make sure that any benefits or things that you're doing are really focused on the right type of stuff that people actually care about. But the leaders have to walk the walk and talk the talk. And I've been very, very lucky to work with amazing CEOs and leaders who've done that at Return Path, DigitalOcean, and here.
Being honest and being kind don't always go together, especially in a startup environment where fast-paced, a lot of pressure sometimes, things just moving and shifting completely into that chaos on a regular basis. How do you and your leadership team actually create that culture where you can do that?
Yeah, it takes more time to give really good feedback. But what I would tell you is it also takes time if people don't do their best work or people screw up and nobody told them how to do things differently. That takes time too in a fast-paced environment. And so what I always say is I'm a big, big believer in feedback. The truth is most millennials, the type of people that companies really want to hire, crave and need feedback. But you can be honest and it can be kind. It doesn't mean it always has to be what they want to hear, but you can deliver it in a kind way, right? And giving developmental, constructive feedback is actually much kinder than not telling people what they're doing wrong. That was a huge tenet of Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, and you can actually do some things in there. You can actually take that approach in lots of ways. There's lots of ways to do that. And I think creating a culture where people feel safe giving uncomfortable feedback and know that they're not going to be punished for it, and also know that they're not going to be punished for making mistakes all the time. Obviously, you make the same mistake over and over again, like that's an issue. But I would challenge the idea that you can't be kind and give honest, constructive feedback and always try to get better. One of our founders always says, if you only get 1% better every day, which doesn't seem that hard to do, like you're going to be 3 times better by the end of the year, and that stuff compounds out. So that all starts with a culture of development and feedback, and we take that stuff seriously. We think it's really, really important.
For you and your journey, I'm curious, like, where did that actually begin? So I'm actually gonna go way back to a younger Matt.
Okay.
I want to go back to.
All right, that was a
I
while
want to
ago.
go back to teenage Matt. Like, what was that teenage Matt like?
Teenage Matt was pretty different than I was now. I didn't probably take like school as seriously as I should have, like what teenager does back then. I was doing some of the similar things. Like I really was involved in like clubs and service things where I wanted to help people. I played a little bit of sports, a little bit of school theater, like all kind of the stuff that like teenagers would normally do. It wasn't really, but I didn't take any of it seriously because I was an idiot, teenager in high school, like most teenage guys, right? It wasn't really until college where I really kind of figured out like what I want to do and what I like and found something I was passionate about. I didn't really find that in high school, but in college, I kind of took this course around like behavioral economics, and that kind of helped me understand like I really am interested in like the psychology of how people work. And I kind of fell in love with that because it just kind of made sense. Just seeing kind of my parents, as a kid when I was growing up, seeing my parents and like they didn't have like great work environments and they didn't feel like respected and treated. And I know, both my parents were really smart, but never felt like they got the best out of their work and didn't have the right environment to do their best work. And I think unconsciously I realized like I want to create a place where people can do their best work because it's so important and it's so critical. And then when I discovered that in college, I'm like, I want to do that. So I ended up going for my doctorate in psychology and organizational psychology, and I really got into kind of studying how people do their best work and how you create environments to get the best out of people. And spoiler not alert, it's not treating them like crap and scaring them to death to do their best work. It's a great environment where people are passionate, people are excited, and that's what I've always kind of strove to create. And I've worked at really big organizations, and I've worked at smaller ones, and my personal preference is to work at smaller ones because you could have more of an impact. You can kind of change things in a way that doesn't require a lot of politicking and bureaucracy, and I've just kind of flourished and thrived hopefully since I've been at kind of earlier stage companies, now working on a platform stage at a VC firm.
Do you ever have any desires of actually creating your own firm and building, since you like building so much?
I do like building stuff. I don't know that I have the entrepreneur gene in me. I like working with teams and people, and this entrepreneur and founder journey is a solo journey, and I'm not the biggest risk taker. I'm fairly risk averse. I actually have such respect for the founders that I work with every day because I don't know that I could do it. I'm kind of the guy you bring in when you just figured things out and you're ready to build it and scale, but I'm not the guy that comes in and builds it from the beginning, and that's okay. Like I think it's really important to know what you're good at and what you're not good at, and some people are natural born entrepreneurs, and there's things that I think I'm good at when it comes to building, but I most enjoy working with other people. I don't really like working by myself, which is one of the reasons I've never been a consultant either. I like working with people every day and building relationships.
Okay, what are some of the things that you've, I guess, discovered about yourself, especially when you think about being in college, doing psychology and going through that to even going past the corporate into the startup space and really applying a lot of the principles that you really learned when it comes to building great organizations with other people? What things have changed along that journey? Because I think that's really, really important as to how I see the world right now as well.
Yeah, it's a really thoughtful question. I think for me, one of the things I've realized is kind of weird. So, like, I don't like going out things solo. I do my best work when I'm working with other people. It's really important to me to work with people I trust. Like I said, I'm not good at like the political side of things. And so if I don't have like deep trust with someone I work, it's going to be really hard for me. I'm not able to be like authentic in that way. I'm not good at that particular skill. So people that you care about and like and trust for me is really, really important. And I can't work in an environment like that. And just in my personal life too, like I'm too old to not be around like people that really have like a meaningful connection to and I care about and trust. So my circle has gotten smaller in a lot of ways, but it's also gotten deeper. And obviously your family, of course, coming first.
You're a father of what, 3 daughters?
I know, it's crazy, right?
What?
It's a lot. It's really a lot.
What's parenting taught you?
It's kind of a cliche and everyone says this, but you don't realize it until it actually happens. But when you are raising kids and responsible for their lives, like you see things through their eyes and it gives you such perspective. Like, my parents are no longer alive now, but I understand so much more about them now that I'm kind of doing the things that they had to do. And everyone says a cliche, oh, wait, till you grow up, you're gonna be just like your mom, just like your dad. And to some extent that's true. But I just see things, there's a different perspective around kind of looking through the eyes of seeing someone else do it and caring about how they grow and the decisions they make. And it changes your own priorities too. For me, everything is about kind of creating a better environment, a better world for my kids. Certainly when the stuff I do in the world of business around like how can I hopefully impact in some way the type of business world that I want them to grow up in and I want them to work in. So for my professional life, it impacts the way I do things. But on a personal level, which I think is what you're asking, is it's just amazing to see things through the eyes of like young girls turning into women growing up, and it changes your entire perspective about how you look at things. At least for me, it did.
I feel I love the way that you kind of describe it because it's a lot of times it's what's happening in our personal life can actually influence what's happening in our professional life in a sense and how we view things.
Maybe you show up in different ways, but you bring the same beliefs, you bring the same values in. And, I'm not a big believer in it's not personal, it's business mentality. Like everything is personal. You're dealing with human beings. It doesn't mean that you make hard decisions, but I've never been able to separate the two. And I've found some of my like deepest friends from people I've worked with, and I've hired friends that I work with, and it's important. Like you're spending so much time, like the person you are shows up in all sorts of different ways. But I think it's really important to be consistent in that way.
So do you then believe that it's possible to have work-life balance, or do you think that it's a fallacy in a sense of chasing the impossible, and then you have to kind of create what works for you?
I don't think balance is the right word. I think you have to prioritize different things at different time. I think it's important to have a healthy integration between the two. I'm doing this from my office in my home, so I don't go into a traditional office regularly. So I'm around my family a lot, and that's worked really well. I drive my kids to school every morning. If I have to be there for them, I will make the time to do that. And that means that I'll probably work later most days than traditional hours, but I balance it out with the flexibility I have to be with my family when I need me during the day. And that works great for me. Like I really, really like it. I actually really struggle with the traditional constraints of a 9 to 5 office, I think, for the most part. So there are some trade-offs I make because I said like I work later hours, and part of that is a lot of my team is based out of Los Angeles, and I'm in New York. But for me, like it's integrated in a way that works for me, and hopefully I'm able to make the trade-offs in a way where I'm not overcompensating all the time. Look, there are times where like you really got to like hunker down at work, and there's a big project or something really critical or something for a portfolio, and I've got to focus and do that, and I'm going to spend more time there. But there are other times when my family's really important. I'm going to make sure that I'm there as well, and I'm comfortable making those trade-offs. So it's not about the balance, because it's never fully 50-50 or whatever it is. But I hope I've been lucky enough that I've been able to figure out a way to integrate the two. And I do think it's kind of where the world's moving. It's why more and more people are getting excited about remote work. And, they recognize that there are ways that you can kind of manage these things that don't have to be like the way it used to be before. And for me, it enables me to do my best work and hopefully be the best parent and dad I can be. And I think other people are finding that it's actually able to make them better at what they do rather than kind of giving up something. And that's how I do. That's how I kind of balance it or integrate it to your question.
Have you seen that tension play out between people who believe exactly that remote work gives you that flexibility, that freedom, where people it's now about the performance rather than just physically being there, versus I want to say the older people who not necessarily age, but are very much like, let's get people back into the office and people need to be here for them to be seen. Have you seen some of that tension play out?
There are a lot of people who believe that you're not working as hard if you're not in the office. And I think it's a matter of control more than anything else. Every research I've seen shows that people are more productive when they're working remotely. If anything, there's more of a problem, which you never stop working when you're home because your computer's right there. You wake up, you do it, whether your phone or anything else. So if anything, the research has shown that people work more when they're not in the office. So I do think there is some control. I think there's just some aversion to change. I think there's a little bit of, we spend all this money in the office. Why are people coming in? What's interesting about that is most of the early stage companies I see starting choose not to have an office. because they know that they can just get better work, get better people. They figure out a way to build that connection. Really, the return to the office is people who've already committed to having an office, which I think is an interesting one, is that most of the newcomers are not being based out of. There are some, and I think it works differently for different people, and it's cool to know that, and you should be really clear about what works for you, and you should hire and select and all that stuff for the right people. I know a lot of people say like it's better for collaboration, it's better for certain types of work. That's true, but most of the time you're not collaborating at work. Most of the time, for a lot of times you're just sitting at your, and obviously I'm talking about a specific class of workers, right? Like there's obviously certain jobs that have to be done in person, and I get all that. But my experience is most of the time if you can find a quiet, distraction-free place to work independently, you'll get your best work done. And then the best companies figure out time and space and ways for people to work together when they need to. So they'll bring their teams together for offsites more often, and they'll get that collaboration and they'll get that connection. But in person all the time, just I think that is an outdated way of working things. So I think over time it will slowly evolve, and it'll be less and less the norm. And for companies and teams that really crave that, they'll be able to go to companies that do that, but that will not be the dominant way of working. I just don't think it's not how the world is anymore.
So if you ever found it that's, like, Matt, I get you, and I'm trying to adapt to this, but I'm struggling to build relationships and build connections with my people remotely. Like, are there some practical things that you can advise them on to actually do?
It's really hard. When I was at DigitalOcean, and I worked there from 2015 to 2019, so we'll call it pre-pandemic, we were a fairly distributed team even then, even before we had to be. And you're totally right. It is harder to build relationships and get to know people remotely. It's not impossible. It's harder. There's lots of other trade-offs that are good about working remotely. Obviously, you can get better access to talent. People have more time. They don't have to commute. But that's one of the downsides. And so what do? You have to work harder to build relationships. And so what we did is we spent more time and money having people meet in person at the very beginning when they first started. So people's first week in a job, they would spend it with their team and their manager. Once a quarter, we would bring offsites. Like, you can do it. You just have to intentionally build in, whether it's time on our Zoom one-on-one to get to know each other and ask about your personal life, or more time in person. You have to do it, right? You have to intentionally find the time to ask questions, get to know them, carve out space in the one-on-ones, and invest time and money in bringing the people together so that you get all that stuff, which you're totally right about. It's super, super important. So if you think about the idea that you're saving money by not having a traditional office, well, you can redeploy that towards more travel or more offsites or whatnot, and you'll still save money in the end, but it's not a total net savings. But again, these are all things that create better connection, better performance, better productivity, all that stuff. It's really, really important. You can't just assume you're going to do things in the same way. You have to do things differently because things are different, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's that difficulty is the fact that, this seems so hard, and then people can just lean back into, let's do things how we've always done. Like you said, a lot of times it's actually, you push past that barrier, you don't get to really see the benefits, really not just see them, but feel the benefits that it becomes for your organization, for your people. And something that you said, Lauren, around not being traditional, and it reminded me of, I listened to a podcast with Seth Golden a couple of days ago. He talked about colleges and how the fact that whole model needs to change and shift. I remember I read something, I think you wrote or you said, about colleges are not, you don't think it's a great financial investment. And I was actually curious about that, to really lead into a bit more into that, to find out your take on it and how you see things.
It's funny because one of my daughters is in her senior year of high school and applying to college. And, obviously we think it's right for her. I think, it is the right investment for a lot of jobs, right? It's being seen just as much as kind of a signifier, as a marker. Obviously, college is extraordinarily expensive, and I think there's lots of reasons and ways why it could be less so. But there's lots of great schools that are less expensive, and I think colleges are getting much better, kind of giving need-based aid to the right people. But the bigger question is what is college for? I think for the majority of people, college is not necessarily like a trade school where you learn to do this and do it. The best colleges teach you how to think critically. They teach you how to build relationships. They teach you how to be independent. Those are actually really good skills to work with. Most people, the jobs they're doing, and again, I'm talking about a certain type of white collar class, obviously, are not doing what their major was. And that's fine, right? Because people are going to have a number of careers. They're going to shift, and they're going to do, I certainly have different types of careers, none of which was directly related to my major, quite honestly. It was really more kind of my grad school type of stuff. But I think learning how to do research, learning how to think critically, those are really, really important skills in any job. At the same time, there are certain type of jobs where college is probably not the right decision for most people. And I would not encourage like getting into significant debt if you're interested in certain types of careers. And I actually think we have to remove the stigma around not going to college because, like I said, college is seen as kind of like a signifier of marker or something it shouldn't be. And there's lots of super, super talented people who don't need to go to college and didn't. And I think that stuff needs to change as well. I think we have to remove that stigma. You know, one of the founders of DigitalOcean, I don't think at the time completed college, and he's certainly successful and one of the smartest and most brilliant people I know, and that's fine. I think people need to be really clear about what they want to do and find the right path. And I think all of us, and I certainly do this like in the hiring mode, and I hire lots of people and I help workers hire a lot of people, try not to kind of bias where someone went to college or what they did. I think if you go to the right school, it can help you, but it doesn't in any way indicate like a type of successor is necessary for success in lots of careers. And I think it's fine. It's a super, super big investment, and I wouldn't encourage people who don't need it to do it.
So if I'm not using college degrees as a separator when it comes to recruiting talent, what are some of the key things that as a founder, as a leader, that I can tap into to really get the best people for my organization to get that great culture that you talked about at the start?
It's funny that you asked that. You know, there's a company I work with in the portfolio called Interviewing.io, and they're all about finding alternative ways of evaluating engineering talent. Traditionally, the top companies like, you know, think your Google, your Apple, Amazon, like they wouldn't even look at candidates unless they went to a very, very select college, right? Which is ridiculous because that has no indication about how well they can code. Like, what if you actually looked at how well they could code, right? And that's all about kind of what Alina and her company is doing. And they're finding much, much broader access talent because they actually use a metric that actually works, which is they actually test their ability to do the job. So the number one thing that I tell anyone who's hiring is like, instead of looking at did they go to an Ivy League school or did they go to a school with a great football program, like there is all sorts of bias and privilege, and for all the reasons you and I just talked about, and privilege involved in kind of like that as your metric for whether someone's going to be at a job. Like actually find a way to come up with an interview process that actually reflects, can you do the work? And there's lots of good ways to do that. Obviously, Interviewing.io does it with engineering. There's lots of ways to test, can someone actually do the work? So that's the number one predictor. Stop looking at college where they went. It doesn't actually predict anything. In terms of like specific characteristics, I look for people who are curious, always willing to learn. One of the questions I always ask in an interview, and maybe I'm giving it away, but that's okay. It's like, I always ask, like, what do you want to get better at? I'm looking for candidates and people who are always trying to get that 1% better every day and have enough kind of self-awareness and humility to know that like everyone is a continued work in progress. So that's a characteristic I look for. Are they able to be team players? Like I said, you know, I am not a big fan of people who kind of do it on their own, no matter how talented they are. Like you've got to be able to work together on a team. So I look for evidence or, you know, how they talk about their big successes. Was it a team success? Was it an individual success? Are they always curious? Are they asking questions? That to me, if you think about like how quickly the world is moving, right? The idea that like what you know now and the way you do things now and what your company does now is going to be exactly the same in like 2-3 years. Like there's just no way that's true. People who are really kind of resilient and looking for resilient and comfortable working in changing environments and curious about how things can change and don't just say this is how we did in the past, here's how we're going to do it in the future. That's really appealing to me. Obviously, like people who are successful have, you know, a playbook and they're kind of certain ways that they go about things, and I think that's really helpful, but you can't apply it set in stone. You've got to take what's work and adapt it to changing times. And so people who are really successful are able to kind of take their playbook and recognize that like they've got to take the basics, but it's going to be a different, the framework is the same, but the way you adapt it in the future is going to be different. So I look for evidence when I interview and hire about people who have that kind of flexibility and curiosity, because I think it's really, really critical.
I'm going to make an assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to assume that you haven't always got it right, and you sometimes made some mistakes.
Oh my
with
God.
hires.
Screw things up on a regular basis.
How
Never.
do you, when that happens, when that's happened in the past, even the first time that happened to you, how did you react and how quickly did you do something about it? Because something I've seen stump a lot of leaders, especially founders, are like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake. How do I do it? So how have you actually dealt with that?
Yeah, I'll answer your question. I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a detour, but I promise I'll get to the question. You know, one of the things that we talked about earlier that I said I realized about me is I do much better in kind of a smaller startup, more agile environment. You know, I spent the first part of my career in big companies where you were actually punished for making mistakes. And I make a lot of mistakes because I like to take risks and I like to try new stuff. And sometimes it works out really well. And point. Sometimes it really, really doesn't. And what's interesting is in big corporations, you're actually really punished for making mistakes. And what that turns into is people are afraid to take risks. And that's why most of the innovation doesn't happen in these big, big companies. And for someone like me, that just was not a place where I could do my best work. So the first startup I ever worked at was, like I told you, this place called Return Path. And I was just really lucky that a founder who believed in creating a really safe environment for making mistakes, because he wanted people to take risks and he wanted people to kind of try to do their best work. And that is the most important thing. You need to be in an environment that supports taking risks and making mistakes, or you'll never get the best work out of people. You'll never get those kind of big, big leaps that can really transform a business or a person. So me personally, like, I've made so many mistakes. Like, I'm very, very comfortable making mistakes. I think the key thing is to recognize quickly that you made a mistake and being able to kind of say, here's what I did, here's why it didn't work. Most importantly, here's what I'm going to do differently next time. And sometimes you can't do that yourself. You actually really need to create what we talked about earlier, like that culture of feedback where you can have someone give you that so that you can learn from it. In any type of environment, making the same mistake over and over again is really problematic. And that speaks to that whole idea, like you actually don't have the learning mindset. You're not actually learning from your mistakes. I think the recognition that like everyone is going to screw up at times, it's okay. It's a hallmark of kind of taking risk. And then being able to either ask for feedback or have that self-introspection about why that happened and what you're going to do differently. And then course correct is probably, don't get hung up on it. Everyone screws up. It's really what you do about it and how you're able to move forward. That makes a difference. And some companies create a really great space for that. Some companies don't. And so you've got to find that kind of inner fortitude to kind of not, let it get you down and move forward. I know that's kind of a cliche, but I think it's really important. The idea that everyone is a continued work in progress is so, so important. And once you kind of accept that at your baseline, making mistakes is a natural kind of evolution from that.
Did you always know that you're a bit of a risk taker always, or was that something you discovered when you worked in corporate?
In some ways, I probably didn't kind of phrase right. I'm not the biggest risk taker in lots of ways. I can be pretty risk averse, but I do really like to try new stuff. So maybe that is kind of within its own little container, a little bit risky. I've always known that. I personally get really energized by coming up with new ways of doing stuff. So I've always kind of figured out that about myself, and that's why certain type of environments worked really well for me and certain types didn't. For example, like high school is not really a place where risk taking is rewarded, right? You actually get rewarded for doing things exactly the way that the book says, exactly the way that the teacher wants, and these kind of outliers, especially in high school, are kind of like pushed down and molded to be just like everyone else, right? And it really is kind of in colleges and other places where you can start to blossom. So yeah, I kind of did, but again, I really believe that environment has such a big impact on it, and I really need to be in the right environment for that type of behavior to be appreciated, at least from me.
I'm curious, you were talking around critical thinking and even the way that you just talk about knowing the environments that are important to you. For me, it goes back into how you think and how you process. What's your take on AI and people and that link that you're seeing happening?
I mean, it's super cool. Obviously, I'm going into ChatGPT. I'm going into Dolly. I'm playing around with it just like everyone else. It's really cool, but I think most people have yet to realize, because it's so magical, and that is exactly the right word to describe it, is that all it is a statistical amalgamation of what humans have actually done. So all it really does is figure out the most likely word to come after the next word based on the creative work of everyone before. And that doesn't take away from the insane technology advancement and all the magic that goes into it. But if we over rely on AI and that's only what we do, we'll never actually make the advancement, because you really need kind of that it hasn't, maybe it will in a few years, like who knows, like at the pace of technology, but you really need that kind of creative spark to kind of advance it. Certainly at the art side, there's real issues about kind of appropriating like actual artist work without credit. And I think you can see that on the written side too. Obviously, if there's a ton of information out there that's factually incorrect, but that's the dominant source of information, the AI is going to reflect that. And you see that examples where it doesn't quite get things factually right because it's just looking at the most likely thing whether it's right. So those in theory are solvable technological problems, but I don't think from a creative standpoint it will ever catch up. By design, it's only built to work off what previously exists. And so we'll see what that looks like as more AI generated content gets out there, and then the AI picks up that AI, so it kind of, and it creates that cycle. And I'm curious to see kind of what that looks like. At the same time, I think there's interesting applications where there's probably some work that doesn't need to be done by people anymore. What does that mean? Does it create more opportunity for more creative type of work? Does it mean everyone moves into more service environments? Does it reframe the nature of just how we work as society and person? Like, I think those are really important questions for a society to think through. I haven't quite quite figured that one out myself yet. I think it's probably for smarter or more important people than me to figure out. But I do think it raises interesting questions about like what our relationship to the work is and how we think about issues of authorship and creativity and what our place in that whole scheme is. I don't know. Super interesting though.
So you got AI, you've got COVID, major disruptions happening right now in the employment world. What are some of the things that you can see coming down the pipeline in terms of disruptions into that space?
I mean, that's a $1 million question. If we knew that, we'd all be super rich. I do think kind of the we talked a little about this. I think the shift to more and more distributed work is a continued one. I think like anything else, the pendulum will shift. There'll be a pushback, but I think that's an actual shift to remote work. I just think it's such a better way of working for most people. I think again, the fact that AI can do things that couldn't be done before for a lot of people will reframe like how they work. I think more and more people will move into kind of service type of jobs. And that's actually interesting because most service jobs can't be done remotely. When is that done? Maybe the technology kind of figures out a way to do that. I hope that some of the changes allow people to reevaluate like how much time they need to spend working versus other things that might be beneficial for society. I'm not super optimistic about that one, but I'd love to see it over time because I think there's probably some unhealthy balance for a lot of people. I don't know. I think a lot of things about, what's really clear is in the past, say 3 to 5 years, a lot of traditionally held assumptions about how work has to be have just been completely shattered in a really short amount of time. And you think about kind of like the pace of change and everything. So I think the next 5 to 10 years will continue to shift in ways that we can't predict. But the only thing I can predict is it will continue to shift very, very rapidly. And people need to be ready for that. And hopefully kind of our societal and our government institutions are which don't typically move that quickly, are starting to think about how they support people as that changes over time.
Thinking about change in terms of startups. So one thing that I've definitely seen with a lot of startups as they grow, that they're growing really quickly, let's say, I don't know, whether it's funding or even COVID, whatever, kind of, they tend to hire really, really, really quickly. And training, development, a lot of things kind of go out the window or they're left way, way behind, that you end up having a lot of people hired in a company, very short space of time, who don't necessarily have the right, let's say the skills, but right training and development in place. And it takes a while to kind of catch up, which then creates some future problems down the line, which you'll also seen play out with some of the layoffs that's happened in the tech industry. Is there something that, based on your experience, because you've worked with this industry for a while, is there a way that founders, startups in particular, can actually mitigate some of that imbalance to make sure it doesn't happen again?
I think it's such a great question. There's a kind of a maxim that a lot of startups say, hire fast, fire fast. And I'm not a believer in either of those things, right? You can hire well with speed, but that doesn't mean that you kind of just throw stuff against the wall and whoever doesn't work kind of gets kicked out of the organization. I think that's actually incredibly disruptive. And in lots of ways, it doesn't enable the organization to go fast, as it does kind of take the time to hire right. Doesn't mean you can't do things at scale. It doesn't mean you can do things with speed, but there's actually real benefits to getting the right people in and making sure they stay. You don't have the turnover. You don't have to waste time on onboarding. You don't lose that knowledge. And it goes to exactly what you're talking about. You take the time to hire, and then you also take the time to focus on growth and development, because the company is going to change really quickly, especially with these high growth ones. And as you talk about, like, things change really quickly. And if you're not investing early in development, you're going to have to replace the people because they're not going to grow as fast as the company can scale. And sometimes you have to do that, especially at senior roles. Like sometimes companies outpace people's growth. But if you build in kind of development into the DNA of the organization to the very, very beginning, you actually will see more speed and efficiency over time, because then people can start to grow and scale with the organization. You don't have to waste time offboarding, onboarding, rehiring, interviewing, training, all that stuff, training skills in that way. So I am a big believer of building and development early on to a company. What's also super interesting about that is when you think about like what, especially millennials and Gen Z, what they most want from their company is that focus on their development. So development is good because it makes your company better. It also makes you more attractive to the best candidates and more likely for them to stay because they crave that. One of the most important things that I tell companies to do is invest early in development. That doesn't mean that you have to hire kind of an internal L&D team. I've actually seen really great success with companies. Like there's a company we work with called Mento, which kind of is an outsourced mentoring and coaching platform where you can get matched up with a much broader array of kind of skills and talent that you have internally. That actually is programs like that and companies like that work really, really well for early stage because they don't have that kind of capability. And, you're not going to have enough senior people who have time to mentor and coach. And it's fine to outsource that stuff. That's why companies like Mentor are really, really good. And there's certainly plenty of others as well. But the idea is that you're building in a belief and a value of coaching and mentoring and development early on from the very, very beginning. Like I said, whether it's an outsourced company, it's whether you just kind of bake that into how you give feedback and coach the people on your team. That is one of the best things you can do to mitigate against advanced change, is create that learning mindset early on. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what the best companies do, at least in my experience.
How do you actually get founders to realize that or to understand that? Because it's not straightforward.
Some do, some don't. I mean, that's a challenge I might have anyone's. I can only speak to my specific experience. When I first started even at DigitalOcean, which was a super high growth early company, the area that I focused on first was not recruiting, was actually development. I was lucky to bring in this incredibly talented woman who was just extraordinarily skilled at creating, manager training programs. And we did that before we focused on building up recruiting because we needed to create the framework, right? So if we didn't teach our managers how to hire, if we didn't teach our managers how to coach, if we didn't teach our managers how to develop, we could get all the recruiters in the world and we would get people in, but they wouldn't know how to assess the right people and they wouldn't be able to keep them. They wouldn't be able to grow them. They would just turn out. We'd have to do it again. So that's a experience of one, but it obviously worked out, in terms of the growth of that company, which is now a successful public organization. I can share the research. I can share my own experience. What I find though, and this kind of ties to what we were chatting about earlier. Sometimes founders need to kind of make their own mistakes before they realize it. And so I'm a big, big believer of not telling people what to do. I am a big believer, like, here's my experience. Here's why I think this way. You've got to kind of figure it out for yourself, and you may have to make a mistake and learn from that way. And that sucks. Like, I'd rather you not do it because it's better for us as a firm. It's better for you to get it right the first time, but it might be more lasting if you learn from your own experience. And then when you do make a mistake, let's talk about like why that happened and what you learned from it, and how you do that. And yeah, I wish I could make founders do everything I want them to do, but the truth is, there's plenty of times where they know more than me, and maybe it's better that they don't always listen to me. I think you have to kind of create that space.
I think that's what you said. That's something leadership that leader just miss sometimes. Because you have to fail. You have to figure that that's where the missing comes from. There's only so much they can take you this and solid and something to be that and step into for yourself that less understand. When they do all that, the message actually stays still. And measure it around.
Embedding that kind of culture right from the start with leaders to really understand that talent development piece. And I was curious, something I've obviously looked at in 13, something that you also talk about a lot is around that DI and embedding that into organizations right from the start as well. How do you broach those conversations out, and again, how do you really get people to really understand the benefits of having that as part of the DNA right from the start as opposed to an add-on?
I mean, it's super critical. We're also lucky that we can actually almost take it a step further beyond that, and that we're lucky enough that we can choose, not always, but we always have a choice about whether we invest in a founder or not, right? Not that we have our pick of every founder in the world, but any investment we make, we obviously get to evaluate the founders too. And so it starts with, when we're looking at founders, just as much as the company and the business opportunities, are these founders that we can work with and believe in, and all the things we just talked about, because they're so important. So if you've got a founder who's very resistant to that idea and doesn't want to take advice from anyone and doesn't believe that anything can learn or grow, it might not be a good fit for us. And so we probably wouldn't invest them in the first place. But assuming that you kind of have that framework, a lot of it is the conversation we talked about. What kind of company do you want to build? How are you going to get the best talent, especially early on? You're not a huge name brand where you've got, thousands of people knocking at the door to come work with you. And so how do you cast as wide a net as possible to make sure that you're getting access to the best talent, to different perspectives that are going to push you, are going to challenge you? And I can talk about all the research that everyone else talks about, and I talk about my experience, and I say, like, what do you care about? How are you going to make sure that you don't have this kind of narrow set? How are you going to make sure you're getting broad people? But a lot of it is sometimes they have to learn from it. Like, if I think they're doing something really unethical or anything like that, like, I'll probably put a stop to it pretty quickly. But I mean, there's so much evidence that, broadening the base of your team and getting different perspective and experiences makes for more inclusive products, makes for more inclusive experiences, creates a better environment, a safer environment for a broader swath of people to do their best work. It's so clear that it's an easy conversation. So we talk about what practices are you putting in place and how are you making sure that you do that, because it's really important to do it early on, because the later you wait to do those type of things, the harder it is. And if you do it from the beginning, then it just becomes natural over time. And then the people you hire practice the same approaches as well. And it's the same thing. It's talking about why it's really important, what I've seen work, why I've seen it work, and then giving us some tools to implement that in their own organizations.
What are some of the, say, pushbacks that you've kind of got over the years that come up in those kind of conversations that you've been able to help?
I mean, there's always the usual one. We don't have time to do it this way. I just need to move quickly. We'll figure it out later on, or it's not important, or don't tell me what to do. And like, I get that, but my belief is that, building a startup it's a marathon, not a sprint. No company is as successful overnight. Even the most successful ones take years and years to kind of really get product market fit and scale. Once they hit an inflection point, then it's kind of off to the races. And so I'm a big believer that doing things right over that length of time is actually much, much more efficient than kind of making mistakes and learning from it. And look, there's value in making mistakes. We talked about this earlier. You want to kind of try things. But there's a difference between trying new things and taking risk versus doing something that there's clear evidence is going to be wrong in terms of how you build your organization. So getting it right in terms of how you build your team and how you manage people will actually be quicker in the long run, because you'll see more productivity, you'll see more efficiency, you'll get people up that curve faster. And so that's part of the conversation. Like I said, some leaders take a while to figure it out on their own. Some people trust us, and I can kind of point to the data on both. But again, it's their company. It's not ours. We're just investors. We're there to guide them. We're there to shepherd them. But, we invest in them because we believe in them. We want to give them every chance to kind of build and create and realize their own vision. That's some of the difference between being in an operating role versus being in an advisor role. And there's benefits to that in terms of you don't have the same kind of pressure of accountability, but there's also downsides. You can't make them do that. But I think on balance, the best investors trust their founders and let them do it. And that's why the best investors are also good coaches themselves and good advisors themselves, because you can't make them do it. We're not a PE firm. We don't take the majority share. We take a small share, and we try to use our influence to help them get better. But at the end of the day, it's still their company. I think it's a good thing.
Founding teams and kind of join into really on what the best possible way. How do you decide on who goes into what?
So at M13, we've got what we call kind of our propulsion team, which is, operating experts who can go in and bring that experience and expertise to bear. So you've got people like me who have some operating experience on the talent and HR side. We've got someone with product experience. We've got an extraordinary marketing leader who is CMO at some of the biggest consumer brands. We've got a data leader. We've got a finance leader. We've got people who built and founded their own companies at the very, very senior ranks of our organization. So we have people who've actually done these type of jobs and work. And we kind of worked over it. Like, we've made all the mistakes. You can learn from our mistakes and hopefully kind of shortcut that process a little bit. And, we're the type of firm that will actually sit down and roll up our sleeves and work together with you side by side, which a lot of firms will not do. So you can get the benefit of our expertise, from our mistakes, and all of us love teaching and coaching and doing the work. Even, people who are pretty senior. It's kind of what gets us excited. And so that's how we sit down with them. And, we try to understand what their issues is. And based on what they're working on, we'll hopefully figure out the right partner or the right team member to send in and do a project with them. And hopefully they benefit from our advice.
Is there any mistake that you made in your career that stands out to you the most, that you learned the most from?
I wouldn't even know where to start with that. I think probably the biggest mistake I made is trying to fit like a square peg in a round hole, which is like, I didn't realize soon enough what I was good at and where I was happiest at. I kind of just went to the big company because that's what I thought I should do. And I figured, well, I just need to change and figure out how to be successful in these type of organizations. And the mistake was, I probably won't be, right? The mistake was not trying other places sooner. I just kept saying, well, this big one isn't right for me. I'll try this big one. Or this big one is right for me. I'll try this big one. It must be me. It's not that much. And so I didn't really kind of realize, like, I didn't have the self-awareness to say, this is where I'm going to be happiest. I didn't optimize for like my own happiness, my own success. I optimized for what I thought I should do or what I needed to do for external reasons. And that's a really hard thing. Maybe you do need to kind of get it wrong a few times to figure that out. But I think that was definitely a big one, is not understanding like myself and what I needed and kind of my quirks and what made me successful and where I was never going to be successful. And I kind of looked into it, to be totally honest. I don't know that I would have figured it out. Who knows how I would have looked. Like, I knew it when I saw it. I might have benefited from some coaching or career coaching or conversations early. And I got very lucky. And, it took a while, but luckily it worked out in the end.
Now, so then reverse that. What are you most proud of?
I mean, it's what we talked about at the very beginning. I've worked at 3 organizations at different stages in their life cycle, from, a company that was already pretty established, and hopefully I made that even better, to a company that was just starting out, that had great product market fit, that didn't really have much of a HR organization. And I was able to build that up from scratch into something meaningful and important, and had a great business outcome. Now starting at almost the very, very beginning of the firm, I really am proud of kind of, I don't want to say like I built a legacy, like I'm some super important person, like I'm just HR talent guy, but I am very proud of kind of the culture and the legacy around kind of showing that you can build really great organizations that are great places to work, that people like working with, and create really meaningful relationships, and also all have really good positive business outcomes, showing that those 2 things can work really together. That stuff hopefully outlasts me when I'm onto whatever is next, or retired, or wherever else. Like I hope that stuff really lasts, and those ideas kind of replicate to other companies in the space, because those 2 things are not in conflict. You can create really dynamic, exciting workplaces where people can do great work and feel safe, and diversity is valued and appreciated, and development is valued and appreciated. You can do all of those things and still have really, really positive business outcomes, probably because of that.
I think that's a really powerful message that's so needed and relevant. And when I think about, so ask me a question recently, what does it take to be a 21st century leader? I think it's that. It's understanding that fundamental, that to really be able to keep on growing, evolving, and attracting the best talent, you need to have that, the way you just kind of described it right now. So really, really like that.
100%. I mean, you think about the AI, right? The AI is going to take a lot of the drudge work out of work. What's going to be left? It's going to be the human stuff. And so the best leaders recognize that it's a human connection that really creates a spark and really creates the energy. Whether you're hiring, whether you're laying off, everything in between, from beginning to end, like it's all about the humans that work there. And the best leaders recognize that and never kind of forget that, no matter how big the scale is. That's how you're going to get the best work and the best outcomes, because the technology is going to start to equivalent out, right? If everyone's using the same AI interface to do that stuff, the only thing that's going to differentiate the good companies or great ones is the quality of the people and how they work. So you've got to focus on that stuff even more.
So my last question how do you define leadership?
There's a difference between being a manager and being a leader, being a boss and being a leader. I actually hate when my team calls me their boss. Like, I never kind of liked it. There's a difference between telling people what to do and creating an environment where they can do their best work. And I think the best leaders set really clear goals, create a really compelling vision, create the environment and the space for people to do their best work, and then they kind of get out of their way. Every person on my team is extraordinarily talented. Most of them are better at what they do than what I can, right? Like, I'm good at what I am, but they're like, my head of recruiting is a way better recruiter than I'll ever be. And I think my secret is, like, I know that. I don't try to pretend otherwise. But the idea is, like, you want to create a space where she and they can all do their best work. And I think that's what a leader does. It's creating the conditions where great people want to work for you, they want to stay, and they do even better than they thought possible. That's what leadership is. It's not putting people in a box and making sure they follow the rules. Like, any idiot can do that. And so I think leadership is all about, inspiring and motivating and driving performance to really amazing levels.
What a great place to finish. And really appreciate this conversation. Actually, for me, it's been quiet.
This was awesome. This was super fun. Thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it from my perspective as well. So thank you. All the information around Matt M13, I think all that's going to be available. And check out Matt on M13. Matt does writing sometimes, which for really good articles, that's what we really enjoyed. And there's a different publication, the number of ones recently, I'm like, actually, that's really interesting. And so I highly recommend that. But yeah, it's Everyday Leadership. We'll see you next week.